you to my lovely assistant. This is a local yellowtail, very similar to what we all had on our plates. I'm guessing, I didn't see the menu, but that tasted like yellowtail to me. So really, you're here in the first place. So we can skip the part where I tell you how important it is not to waste food, because obviously by being here, we all share those same beliefs. But kind of like Chuck said, starting to think outside of the box, here's a few ways that we do our best to think outside of the box, and a few pieces of the fish that we can use. Keeping in mind that we live in a society where our view of what is good food and bad food, it's been, to some extent, don't take insult to this, but we've all been brainwashed, right? You know, like when you're the apple for the teacher, it's that beautiful, shiny, red, perfect apple. Well, those, pretty fruit isn't always the best tasting fruit. Parts of meat that might look gross when we cover it in blood right here and do all this, like, think about barbecue. Think about how popular barbecue is. Barbecue is just something that it's been around long enough to where it's accepted. But really, those are the gnarly pieces of the meat that, the strength of human spirit just figured out how to put love into it and make that stuff taste good. And it's no different with a fish. Some of this stuff might not look gross to us because we're here in the first place, but your average, in our society, people might look at this and say it's gross, go to a ball game, eat a hot dog, and say, oh yeah, I'll take 2 more, right? It's all just conditioning. There's no right or wrong in it. Right and wrong is what's right for the planet, what's right for the environment, what's right for our community. So as far as sourcing goes, and I'll kind of just keep my mouth running while I'm doing all this. As far as sourcing goes, we try to work with local farmers and local fishermen. Having a restaurant, there's a few benefits. We have a little bit of a soapbox to stand on. In the last 10 years, being a chef has been, you've gone from like being the guy in the back room that no one wants to think about. You got Bravo TV, all that stuff. People are kind of looking to chefs more. And people are worried about what they're eating. So we have a little bit of a soapbox to get onto. And with that comes a bit of responsibility. And it's definitely our responsibility to educate, kind of show people what can be done with food that's typically wasted. So as far as plants and stuff go, there's parts of the plants that aren't typically used. You can work with local farmers, see what they're having trouble moving, help them move parts of the plants that nobody typically eats. Broccoli leaves, cauliflower leaves, Brussels sprout leaves, aside from stuff that they may have an abundance of. And stay flexible in your menus so that you have the space to fit that in there. Small menu, big specials board is a template that's worked well for us. So starting with the guts here, we've got our green bag right here. So as we pull the head off, now this is another thing real quick before I get too into this. A lot of it's marketing, right? What's made us think that bright red apple is the better apple? Marketing. Big companies have the money to market. Well, little companies can do the same. And one thing that works for us at Wrench and Rodent and the Wet Noodle is to tie it back to comfort food. Something, childhood nostalgia, things like, you look at restaurants around town, a lot of stuff that's really selling is something that ties back. There's always a place for waffles, always a place for fried chicken, on down the list, chicken noodle soup. That stuff's never gonna get old. So, starting with the head of this guy, and we're still like playing around with different pieces of the fish. We have yet to find a way to make the gills taste good, unfortunately. Don't know if we ever will, but if there is a way out there, we'll find it eventually. So, starting with the head, you can cut the head down the middle. With a little bit of fried chicken breading, you can do, we just do Kentucky fried tuna and a cool dipping sauce. And there's lots of meat hiding in the head. These right here. In a yellowtail, it's less common because they're a little smaller. But you can cut this little nugget out right here. Now on a bigger, flatter fish like a halibut, this is actually the size of a steak. So these are the fish cheeks. That little nugget is one of the most delicious pieces of fish that you can eat right there. But keep in mind this small head, you know, it's down here's the jowl, and fish have jowls too. You can cut that out. On a sea bass or a grouper, there's a more prominent jowl and cheek. On a halibut, huge cheeks. And you look in here. So now we just found out that my lovely assistant is a girl. These are fish eggs. And this is just kind of a seasonal thing. You don't always get them. You can actually pickle these. Vinegar, Korean spices, soy sauce, vinegar, and then you can grill them. You can grill them up, they'll separate apart. You can make, talking about hot dogs, you leave this casing on, keep it in a sugary marinade, and you grill it up. That gets crispy. The inside is amazingly meaty. When you're eating caviar and fish eggs, a lot of that saltiness you're tasting is the salt that man has put on there to cure those eggs. So you can't blame the egg for that salt that's been used in the process. If you use a sweeter marinade, these actually come out really tasting meaty. We've used fish sperm before, which tastes a lot like liver, especially when foie gras was, no matter what side of the fence you stand on, the humaneness of it, people wanted it. When you weren't able to get it in California, we were doing a lot with fish livers to try to satisfy that demand. And no matter where you stand, replacing a force-fed duck liver with the liver of a fish that's already dead that you have in front of you anyway, that's only going to help the situation. So we're just kind of gonna clean this stuff off real quick, then we'll move on to the rest of the fish. And we'll revisit the spine in a minute, because I'll show you something cool you can do with it. So the collars. At the restaurant with these, we have a little thing called Wings of the Sea, tying it back to that comfort food. Chicken wings. Every bar sells tons of them. They're not going anywhere. These are kind of like chicken wings of the sea. So they're great for grilling, frying, anything like that. Some of the tastiest meat on the fish hides right in here. You can also cut out this little nugget, do little fish nuggets with that part, but it's super tasty. Then we have ribs. We have a kind of a fish rib karaage on the menu. And fish ribs are no different than pork ribs or beef ribs in matter of deliciousness. It also leaves you a little, if you know you're selling it, there's a little more margin for error, because there's no real, there's no bad cuts of meat, any type of meat. There's bad butchers and there's lazy chefs. There's no bad cuts of meat. Everything has its purpose. So if you're using every little piece for its purpose, especially when you have hot food and sushi, with sushi you want the most tender cuts. So if you have everything on the menu is completely, it exists to get, the optimum use out of each piece, that also leaves a sushi bar that has the most tender center cut. That's your sushi bite is kind of like the filet mignon of the fish, just this super tender muscle, super tender belly. So these are the ribs. You can cornstarch them, fry them, you can grill them, and then cut them. But if you look at these, it's a little belly cut on the end. There's your bone. And that is another delicious little finger food. Getting down to here, you have skin and pretty much belly and tenderloin. This is all down to sushi if you have a sushi bar, steaks if you want like a seafood dinner, something like that would be your seafood dinner cut. Take these skins off. This is another thing that is delicious. We fry them up and do fish skin crisps and guacamole. I mean, come on, how good is the turkey skin on Thanksgiving? Or the skin on the roast? Like, we all love that stuff. Bloodline is not commonly used in this country, but in Japan, they believe that it really prevents cancer. It is a stronger flavor, got a lot of iron. That's kind of like the fish's main pathway of blood through the animal. But you can always rinse it. You can marinate it in strong things like citrus, ginger, garlic, and that mellows it out. Like out in the grocery stores in Hawaii, they got something called aku, and that's just the bloodline dried. Now the old timers love it. The younger people, their tastes have kind of become more European. But already, if you made it that far, you're doing way better than the next guy. Moving on to the bone. No matter how good you are, there's always going to be a little bit of meat left on the bone. Usually the meat closest to the bone is the tastiest. So this right here is great to have a ceviche on the menu.